Single mom fainted while working, until the Mafia boss found a baby photo in her pocket. My hands trembled as I tried to balance 3 plates of spaghetti along my arm. Weaving through the maze of white-clothed tables at Rosario's, the Friday night air pulsed with life, filled with the clink of glasses, bursts of laughter, and the mouth-watering aroma of tomato sauce and garlic hanging thick in the air. I had been on my feet for 10 straight hours without a single break, and the black slip-resistant shoes on my feet felt no different than 2 heavy blocks of concrete. Table 7. Emily. Don't mess it up this time, Marco hissed as I passed the bar, his voice nearly drowned beneath Dean Martin's crooning drifting from hidden speakers. I nodded, forcing a smile that never reached my eyes. Just 3 more hours. 3 more hours and I could go home to my tiny apartment, kick off these shoes and collapse into bed. The thought of my son's photo, Jack, carefully folded and tucked deep in the pocket of my apron, helped me stand a little taller. Everything I was doing, every soul-draining shift, every fake smile, every swallowed insult, was for him. As I neared table 7, the floor tilted slightly beneath me, my vision starting to blur around the edges. I blinked hard, trying to shake the dizziness. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with rent due in 3 days and Jack needing new shoes. Fettuccine Alfredo, I announced, setting the first plate in front of a silver-haired woman draped in shimmering pearls. Spaghetti bolognese. I handed the second plate to a man in a sharp, expensive suit. But the third plate never made it to the table. The room lurched violently, the sound around me warping like a record played at the wrong speed. My knees buckled, and I felt myself falling endlessly. The last sound I heard was the sharp crash of shattered dishes before everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I had no idea where I was. I could no longer hear the soft murmur of voices or the music that had filled the restaurant. Everything was unnaturally quiet, as if the world itself had frozen in place. I was lying on a black leather sofa in a room lit by the warm haze of dim lighting. The scent in the air was dizzying, stronger than the lightheadedness that had brought me down. It was a rich cologne, with the deep scent of cedar blended with something darker, something dangerous. She's awake. A man's voice sounded from my right. I tried to sit up, but the room spun like a carousel. A firm hand rested on my shoulder, keeping me down. Take it slow, he said, not unkindly, but with a quiet authority that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. As my vision settled, I saw a man sitting at the edge of the sofa, watching me with dark, calculating eyes. Everything about him radiated power. His perfectly tailored black suit, the flash of gold at his wrist, his face chiseled like marble with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a jaw sharp enough to cut glass. Who? I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry I barely recognized my own voice. As if reading my mind, he picked up a glass of water from the table nearby and handed it to me. I took it with both hands trembling, feeling his eyes tracking my every movement. Drink that. Then we'll talk about why one of my servers passed out in the middle of my restaurant. His restaurant? My heart stumbled. Marco had mentioned the owner would be stopping by tonight, but I'd been too busy to care. I'd never seen the man who signed my paychecks, but I had heard the whispers. Vincent Morello, the man who owned not just Rosario's, but a web of businesses spread across the whole of Chicago. They called him the Quiet Boss. I sipped the water, trying to steady myself. I'm sorry, Mr. Morello. It won't happen again. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. You know who I am. It wasn't a question. Yes, I whispered, suddenly aware that I was alone with a man no one dared speak about out loud. Vincent leaned in slightly, and again that scent enveloped me. No longer just a fragrance, but a soft warning dressed in seduction. And you're Emily Carter, 32 years old, single mother, been working at Rosario's for 4 months and 11 days. He paused, as if flipping through a file in his mind. I froze. How could a man like him know so much? And why would he care? The answer came faster than I expected. As I set the glass down, something slipped from the pocket of the apron lying beside me on the table. Vincent picked it up. It was the photo of Jack, the one I always kept with me to remind myself why I had to keep going. I reached for it, my heart pounding. Please, give that back to me. But Vincent didn't hand it over right away. He stared at the photo, his gaze softening ever so slightly. He has your eyes, he said. Then read the name scribbled on the back. Jack. The way he said my son's name made it hard to breathe. Every instinct in me screamed to be careful. I pushed myself to sit up fully, even as my body still trembled. Give it back to me, I said again. Firmer this time. He didn't resist. But as my fingers brushed the photo, his hand briefly touched mine. Just a fleeting moment, yet something lingered in the air between us. He sat back down, folding his hands in front of him, his gaze never leaving mine. Where is the boy? Emily? His voice was softer now, but there was no mistaking the command woven into it. At home, with my landlady, I answered slowly, trying to mask the fear that crept into my chest. Vincent nodded slightly, as if confirming something. And the father? That question struck like a slap. I gripped the photo tight until my knuckles turned white. Not in the picture. His choice or yours. His. I admitted, hating the weakness I heard in my voice. He left as soon as he found out I was pregnant. Vincent's eyes darkened. I had heard rumors about what happened when someone made him angry. I never thought I'd see that look up close. His name? Why do you want to know? I asked, suspicion rising like smoke in my thoughts. He didn't answer right away, just smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that never reached his eyes. Let's just say this. I take a personal interest in men who walk away from their responsibilities. And as he looked at the photo of my son again, I realized something. I had just stirred a force far greater than I could ever control. And maybe one I wouldn't be able to outrun. If you've made it this far and felt your heart grow a little heavy, or if your eyes lingered for just a moment when you pictured that photograph slipping from Emily's apron pocket, then maybe, just maybe, you understand just as I do that every single mother carries more than just a story on her shoulders. If you're watching this video from anywhere in the world, I'd love for you to leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. What city? What state? Or maybe just a quiet little room where this story has found you. Let me know how far this journey has reached across this wide world. And don't forget to subscribe, to like this video, and to share the Dear Single Mom YouTube channel, so that every day we can step into stories that reach into the deepest corners of the heart. This story is only just beginning, and I believe what lies ahead will be filled with even more unexpected turns. Now, I invite you to continue with the next part. I still couldn't understand why I was still sitting there, on that cold leather sofa, in an elegant room bathed in soft golden light, the scent of expensive wood lingering in the air like a whisper from another world. The silence was so complete I could hear my own breathing, could hear the calculated, quiet footsteps of the man standing across from me, Vincent Morello, the most powerful man I had ever met, and the same man who had just held the photograph of my son as if it were something far more significant than anything I had ever written on a job application. He was in no rush. Every movement he made spoke of absolute control. I was used to the kind of people who barked orders, like the restaurant manager who screamed at me when customers complained about late food. But this man didn't need to raise his voice. He only had to look. And with just that look, I already knew there were no choices left for me in this room but the truth. I don't understand why you care, I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion and thirst. I'm just a waitress. Nothing more. Vincent tilted his head slightly, his gaze drifting from the still half-full glass in my hand to the dirt-smudged shoes I had worn through endless shifts. You're Emily Carter. You are not no one. Your father once worked for my family. Emily. And I don't forget a debt. I froze. My father? A simple electrician. Gone when I was just 12. Once worked for a crime family? Vincent studied my face like a man tossing a stone into still water, waiting to see how far the ripples would go. I shook my head, disbelief tightening in my chest. You've got the wrong person. My father was a good man. He had nothing to do with that world. Vincent's gaze didn't waver. There was no humor there. Only the certainty of a man far too familiar with truths others couldn't bear to hear. I'm not saying your father was a bad man, but he saved my father's life. Once. maybe twice. I owe your family more than you know. I had never felt my world so fragile. So thin. The things I had believed about my life were suddenly being pulled out from beneath me like someone had yanked the rug under my feet. I don't know anything. My mother never mentioned any of this. Vincent exhaled slowly, as if choosing his next words with care. No one told you because your father wanted to keep you safe. He always wanted to keep his family far from this life. And he did. Until you showed up at Rosario's. His eyes darkened. My sister happened to see you there. Told me there was a waitress with the same eyes as someone from the past. I had someone look into it. When the name Emily Carter came up in the employee list, I knew I had found the daughter of the man who once saved my family. I shivered. So you investigated me. You're not safe. Emily, you don't know it yet. But someone has started watching you. Watching Jack. My heart pounded wildly. Out of rhythm. Who? Vincent stood and walked to the desk nearby, opened a drawer and pulled out a brown envelope. Setting it gently on the table, he said nothing. I stepped forward slowly, hands trembling as I reached for it. Inside were photographs. Me and Jack at the park. At the grocery store. In the parking lot near our apartment. Some were taken from far away. Others were disturbingly close. There were even pictures of Mrs. Ruiz, my landlady, holding Jack's hand on their way out. I looked up, my face pale. How long have you known about this? A week. I had to make sure they weren't mine. That they weren't police. I don't know their purpose yet. But I won't let anything happen to you or your son. I stepped back, my entire body cold. Why are you doing this? Who am I to you? He looked at me for a long moment, then said, quietly, slowly, because I never forget an old debt, and because when I saw that photo fall from your apron, I knew that if you went down, a child would be left to carry the weight. I won't let that happen. Not to the daughter of Vincent Morello. Not to the grandson of the man who once put his own life ahead of mine. My mind spun, but this time not from exhaustion, from the weight of a truth crashing down like a storm. Vincent stepped closer. Not enough to be threatening, but close enough that I couldn't pretend he wasn't there. I have an offer for you, Emily. A chance to change your life, to protect your son, and to close the debt that's passed between 2 generations. He paused, his eyes dark as a Chicago midnight. But first, I need you to rest. Eat something. Get some sleep. And in the morning, I'll explain everything. I heard myself speak, as if from a distance. And if I say no, he smiled. That smile again. The one that never reached his eyes. I'm not used to hearing no. And I have a feeling you're not in a place to say it. Not when you have a child who needs you alive. Not when you know you're being watched. And not when I'm the only thing standing between your family and something far worse than you've imagined. I said nothing more. And I didn't sleep that night. Not after seeing those photos. Not after realizing I had stepped into a room I could never walk out of the same again. I woke to the early morning sun slicing through thick silk curtains, casting the room in a soft golden haze, as if the air itself were drifting in a quiet dream. It took me several seconds to remember that I was no longer in my worn-down apartment, no longer hearing the clatter from the restaurant downstairs, no longer listening to the creaky footsteps of Mrs. Ruiz pacing the wooden hallway outside my door. Instead, there was only stillness, the faint scent of peppermint tea in the air, and linens far too soft, too clean, too untouched by the life I knew. I was still in yesterday's uniform, minus the apron and shoes. My throat was dry, my stomach hollow with hunger, and my mind still echoed with Vincent's voice from the night before. An offer, a debt, a chance to change everything. I sat up slowly, startled to find a neatly folded set of clean clothes placed at the foot of the bed, along with a handwritten note. Emily, have breakfast, then meet me in the library. We'll talk, Vincent. I stared at the words for a long moment, as if reading them over and over might somehow reveal his true intent. Then I changed into the fresh clothes, a pair of dark jeans that fit perfectly and a crisp white shirt, and followed the directions to the library on the lower floor. The room felt like stepping into another world. Walls lined with old leather-bound books. A high ceiling from which a delicate chandelier cast a warm golden glow. And in the corner, Vincent Morello, reading a thick file with an espresso cup in hand, dressed in a suit as if he hadn't slept at all. I tapped lightly on the doorframe. He looked up instantly, as though he had known the exact second I would appear. "Please, have a seat." I stepped inside, brushing my fingers along the edge of the chair as if to confirm it was all real. I told myself I was ready, or tried to believe it. Vincent closed the file and set it aside. "I'll be direct. I need an assistant. Someone capable, discreet, organized, someone who can stay calm under pressure, someone I can trust completely. And I want that person to be you." I blinked. I must have misheard. I'm a waitress, not a secretary, and definitely not the kind of assistant a man like him would need. Vincent didn't flinch. He simply lifted his coffee, took a sip, then spoke slowly. "You were a financial analyst at an investment firm in Boston. Graduated top of your class. Left your career abruptly when you became pregnant. Lost contact with your family. Raised your child on your own. I've seen your records. You're qualified. No. You're more than qualified. You're exactly what I need." My breath caught. He knew everything, even the parts of my past I had tried to bury. I couldn't help but ask, "Why me?" "Because of your father. And because of Jack. You need steady income. You need security. You need safety. And I need someone like you in my office. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." I took a long breath, the war inside me impossible to ignore. There was something wrong about this. Something that felt like being asked to sign a contract whose fine print I would never fully understand, but whose consequences I would have to carry. What exactly would I be doing? Managing my schedule. Organizing meetings. Reviewing reports from subsidiaries. Occasionally accompanying me on business trips. Nothing illegal. Everything on the legitimate side of my operations. I'm expanding investments, real estate, tech, services. I need someone sharp to keep things running clean. His voice never rose, never pressed, but I understood. This wasn't an invitation. It was a directive, softened only by the illusion of choice. Where would I work? A private office in my central downtown building. You and Jack would be relocated to a high-security apartment nearby. Jack will have a vetted caregiver. I won't hand my son over to strangers. You won't have to. You'll have full control to interview and choose who stays with him. Or, if she agrees to move, Mrs. Ruiz can continue caring for him. I said nothing. I was standing at a crossroad. One path led back to the life I had known: meager meals, worn shoes, Constance traîne, and the risk of losing Jack if I ever collapsed again. The other offered stability, money, safety, but came with a cost I could not yet name. Finally, I asked, "Can I think about it?" "You have until tonight, but I suggest you don't take long. Not because I'm in a hurry, but because someone else is watching you, and I can't protect you and your son forever if you choose to stay on the outside." Vincent stood, signaling the end of the conversation. I remained where I was, heart racing, knowing my life was about to turn down a path I could never walk back from. And maybe I never truly had a choice at all. I returned to the living room after speaking with Vincent, my mind still spinning. Everything had happened too fast. Just yesterday, I was a waitress struggling to balance heavy plates of pasta on my arm. Today, I had been offered a position I never imagined someone like me could receive. Assistant to the man whose name was spoken in whispers throughout Chicago. A name people never dared repeat. Vincent Morello. I sat at the edge of the bed, still clutching the note that outlined the conditions of the job. His voice echoed in my head. "You have until tonight to decide, but I suggest you consider it sooner. Not because I'm in a rush, but because it seems someone else is watching you." I looked over at the photo of Jack resting beside the pillow. My son's smile had always been the only thing that kept me going. But this time, love alone wasn't enough. I needed safety for him. I needed the truth. And what kept me from walking out of that mansion was Vincent's short, quiet sentence. "Because of your father. Because of a debt unpaid." I needed to understand what that truly meant. An hour later, Vincent had someone lead me to the top floor of the mansion, to a place he called the archive room. The air there was cool, filled with the faint scent of old paper, and the stillness that only silence can bring. Tall filing cabinets loomed around us, locked with coded dials. No one else was present, just Vincent and me. He pulled out a weathered file, its cover labeled by hand with a small name tag, Vincent Carter, my father's name. I stopped breathing. Vincent laid the file gently on the table and opened it slowly, as if lifting the lid on something buried deep. He worked for my father since I was 10. Back then, he was one of the most trusted men in our circle, not just for his skill, but for his loyalty. Did you know he once saved my life? I shook my head, too stunned to speak. Once, at the South Docks, a man had a knife hidden in his coat. Your father was the only one who noticed. He stepped in front of me and took the hit. It was serious. I stared at an old photo tucked inside the file. My father, looking so much younger than I remembered, stood beside a teenage Vincent, both in suits, attending some formal gathering. They looked more like friends than boss and employee. After that day, your father became my personal guard. No one came near me unless they went through him, and no one, not even my own father, could make him bend the rules. Vincent pulled out another photo, a birthday party. I was small, riding on my father's back. The smile on his face wasn't the smile of a hired man. It was the smile of someone who protected, who cared deeply, a man who felt like family. I swallowed hard. My father had never said a word about this life. To me, he was a quiet man, often gone, always coming back with small gifts from some job site. After the accident when I was 12, he never came home again. A scaffolding collapse, my mother told me. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Then he placed his hand gently over the file, his voice low. It wasn't an accident. It was an assassination. He shielded me a second time. That time, he didn't survive. You didn't know because we arranged for the story to be changed. To protect you, and your mother. A construction site accident is easier to explain than getting caught in the middle of a hidden war. I felt heat rise in my face, my pulse a dull roar in my ears. My entire childhood had been wrapped in a lie, carefully constructed to keep me safe. Did my mother know? Vincent nodded. She knew, but she promised never to tell. It was the only condition we gave her, so we could ensure your safety. She left Chicago soon after. Started over. I stood there, running my fingers lightly across the rough paper of documents that carried no titles. Handwritten notes from my father, faded photos that seemed to belong to a stranger wearing my father's face. And now, the only man who still remembered him as he truly was stood in front of me. Vincent Morello. I looked up, meeting his eyes. Why tell me this now? Because when you collapsed at Rosario's, and I saw Jack's photo fall from your apron, I knew there was a debt I had still not paid. You're not just another employee. Emily, you're the daughter of the man who gave his life so I could live. And now, when someone is watching you, when someone is circling your son, I will not stand aside, whether you choose to work for me or not. I will protect you both. But if you accept the offer, I will have a reason to keep you close. And no one touches someone who works directly for Vincent Morello. I didn't answer. I simply held the file tighter in my hands, my chest heavy with a strange, unfamiliar ache. For the first time in years, my father wasn't a shadow anymore. He had lived another life, carried another purpose, and the price he paid for it was his life. Now, it was my turn to decide whether I had the courage to step into the world he once risked everything to defend. I left the archive room with my mind reeling, as if I'd just stepped out of a storm that had ripped away the foundations of everything I thought I knew. Vincent's words still echoed in my ears, like the faint, haunting call of a distant past I'd never been allowed to touch. My father hadn't died in an accident. He was assassinated while shielding a man whose name carried weight in every dark corner of this city. That man now sat across from me, calmly stirring his coffee as though he had just recounted a worn-out story with no more significance than a weather report. But to me, everything had shifted. Every memory, every decision, every fragile hope I had clung to was now colored by truths that had long been buried. When I returned to the library, Vincent was standing by the tall window, looking out over the stillness of the garden that lay behind the mansion. "Without turning," he said. "I thought you should know this before you decide." I stood silently, the old photos still clenched in my hand. "What is it?" "Last night, after you fell asleep, I received a report from one of my people. Someone approached Mrs. Ruiz yesterday afternoon, posing as a utility worker. They asked questions they had no reason to ask. About you, about the boy. They left when a neighbor came outside. I couldn't tell if I was shivering from the cold or from fear." Vincent turned to face me, his eyes calm but deep, like dark water that concealed more than it revealed. "Do you think someone knows who you really are?" I shook my head, but in my mind, a face emerged, Daniel. I had cut ties with everyone. I had disappeared, or so I thought. Vincent stepped toward the desk and opened a slim laptop. On the screen, security footage flickered to life. A grainy frame showed Mrs. Ruiz standing on the front porch, speaking with a man in a green uniform. His face was blurred, but the way he moved was painfully familiar. He gestured toward the apartment, then toward the playground nearby. Mrs. Ruiz looked wary. After a few minutes, he walked away. Vincent paused the footage and zoomed in. As the man's features sharpened, my heart stopped. I knew that face, not from now, but from long ago. A glance, a memory. Daniel's cousin. I looked at Vincent, my voice barely audible. "He's one of the Bryants. That family, Jack's father's family." Vincent didn't look surprised. "I thought so. Their company is in trouble. Inside sources say they're about to lose a major investment. There's a financial scandal brewing under the surface. And sometimes, the only way to save a crumbling empire is to paint the picture of a perfect family." I understood immediately. If Daniel found Jack and me, he could parade us in front of the cameras to salvage his image. Play the role of a remorseful father. A man who made mistakes but found his way back. But that also meant I would lose control. I could lose Jack. Vincent closed the laptop, his expression softer than usual. "I won't let that happen. But I need your cooperation. I can't protect someone who refuses to be protected. You have to decide." "Emily." I turned toward the window. The sky above Chicago was a hard, cold, gray. I thought of Jack, of his small hand wrapping around mine on cold nights, of the way he whispered, "Mom, will I go to school tomorrow?" I had lived my entire life with worry. But this fear was different. It wasn't about bills or broken shoes. It was about someone creeping closer, quietly but surely, to take away the only thing that mattered. I turned back to Vincent. "You said you're not used to being told no." He gave a small nod. "Then let this not be an exception. I accept your offer. I'll work for you. On one condition. I have full authority over everything concerning Jack. If you agree, I'm yours. If not, I'll disappear with my son by morning." Vincent didn't hesitate. "Agreed. I'll have the contract drawn up, and I'll send someone to Mrs. Ruiz today. You and Jack won't spend another night in that apartment." I nodded, though my hands were still clenched tightly at my sides. From this moment on, I was no longer Emily Carter, the part-time waitress scraping by in a cramped apartment. I was under the protection of Vincent Morello, and that meant my world would never be simple again. But if that was the price I had to pay to keep Jack safe, I would pay it, even if it cost me everything I had left. 3 days after I agreed to become Vincent Morello's assistant, everything in my life and Jack's changed beyond recognition. We moved into a penthouse apartment perched high above River North, a space nearly 5 times the size of our old place, with floor-to-ceiling windows, dark hardwood floors, and a balcony overlooking the shimmering lights of the Chicago River. Every inch of it had been furnished in advance, elegant and pristine, but Jack's room was the only space I insisted on arranging myself. I needed him to feel like this was home, not just a pause between storms, not a place the wind could sweep us from without warning. Mrs. Ruiz moved in with us, just as promised. She cared for Jack while I worked at Vincent's corporate headquarters, a sleek black glass building on Michigan Avenue, where everyone spoke in quiet, clipped tones, and no one dared arrive even a minute late. I learned how to manage his meetings, organize documents, streamline reports, and track shifting investments with meticulous care. Vincent never raised his voice, but his silence alone was enough to make me triple-check everything before submitting it. He wasn't warm, wasn't easy to read, but he had never once crossed a line that made me question the decision I had made. Everything seemed to be settling into a rhythm, until that Friday afternoon. I was reviewing the quarterly report, my mind half lost in numbers, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mrs. Ruiz. Her voice was tight, almost a whisper. "There's someone here." A man, not a stranger. "It's Mr. Morello." I froze. "Vincent. At my home. With Jack." No warning. I asked to leave early and rushed home, every block stretching too long, as if the city itself had slowed down just to make me sweat. When I opened the door to the apartment, the late afternoon light poured through the windows, casting a golden haze across the living room floor where two figures sat. Jack was cross-legged, surrounded by Legos, and across from him sat Vincent, his suit jacket folded neatly on a chair, a green piece in his hand. Both were focused, like two engineers in a high-stakes negotiation. When I entered, Jack was the first to look up, his face lighting up. "Mom, Uncle Vince is building a house for my robot." I gave him the tiny wrench. I nodded, stunned by how naturally Jack said his name, by how easily my son let this man into his world. Vincent stood, giving me a nod. His expression was composed as always, but there was something new behind his eyes, a quiet shift, something less guarded. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I wanted to meet him, and I thought, he should know the man his mother works with every day." I tightened my grip on my bag. "I understand, but I need you to tell me next time. Vincent, this is my son's space." He was quiet for a beat, then nodded. "I'll remember that." I sat down beside them, surrounded by a scattered mosaic of colorful blocks. Jack showed me the half-finished house, then turned to Vincent. "Tell me a story about Mom when she was little. When did you meet her?" Vincent hesitated, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw him caught off guard. Just for a moment, he looked at me, almost asking for permission, then turned back to Jack. "When your mom was your age, she jumped into a freezing lake behind her house to rescue a toy duck that had floated away." I stared. That was a story only my father used to tell, one of those small memories no one else would know. Jack laughed, delighted, and Vincent kept going, using his hands to act out the scene, adding in funny little twists that made Jack hang on every word. There was no performance in his voice, no effort to impress, just a quiet kind of remembering, like opening a door he hadn't touched in years. When Jack ran to the kitchen for a drink, I looked at Vincent. He didn't look away. "You can rest easy. I'm not here to take your son from you. I made a promise. I only want him to know that if something were to happen one day, he's not alone. There's someone else out there who would protect him." I didn't know why, but those words made my eyes burn. Not with fear, but with the strange comfort of knowing for the first time in years that I wasn't entirely on my own anymore. When Vincent left, Jack waved at him as if he were family. I stood at the door, watching as it closed behind him, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. I had once imagined Vincent Morello as a cold man, distant, someone who only understood power and control. But in that room, beneath the soft amber light and the sound of my son's laughter, I saw something else, a crack in the armor, a gentleness that even he might not have realized was there. And for the first time, I began to wonder, was this the beginning of something more than a working relationship, or the start of a change neither of us had prepared for? That night, after Jack had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, I sat alone in the living room, a cup of tea warming my hands as soft lamplight pooled over the open notebook I'd carried with me since the day we moved in. I turned to a fresh page and wrote at the top, in bold, deliberate strokes, boundaries. Since the moment I agreed to work for Vincent Morello, I hadn't taken a single pause to reflect on where exactly this road was leading me. Everything had moved too fast. From the moment I collapsed in that restaurant to standing face to face with a man most of Chicago only whispered about. Then came the apartment. the contract, the job, and placing my son in a circle of influence I still didn't fully understand. I'm not naive. I know Vincent never forced my hand, but his power moves like an undertow, silent, insistent, and always pulling everything in the direction he intends. But today, watching him sit on the floor with Jack, piecing together Lego bricks and telling stories from a childhood I never knew he remembered, I realized something else. If I didn't take the time to define my place in all of this, one day I'd wake up not knowing where I stood or what I had let myself become. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Vincent was in a meeting, but I left a message asking to speak privately during his lunch hour. He agreed without hesitation. Didn't even ask why. When we sat down together in his office later that day, the door closed behind us. I didn't circle around the conversation. I need to make some things clear. Vincent nodded once, pulled a fresh coffee from the machine, and sat across from me, patient and still. I don't object to you seeing Jack, but that can't happen spontaneously. Any interaction needs to be something I'm informed about in advance. He didn't interrupt. I went on. And I need you to understand this job. I'm doing it for my son's future. I need to know that I won't be pulled into anything outside the bounds of legality. I'm not saying you're hiding something, but I've lived my life walking the edge of uncertainty, and I refuse to let my son inherit that same instability. Vincent studied me for a long moment, then leaned back slightly in his chair. You're afraid of me. I didn't deny it. I'm afraid of the power you hold. Afraid of how easily you move pieces across a board that most of us don't even know we're standing on. But more than anything, I'm afraid of forgetting why I said yes to any of this. It was for Jack, not for you. His face remained composed, but I saw something shift in his eyes. Not anger, not defensiveness, something closer to respect. You once told me you weren't used to being told no. So this isn't me saying no. It's me drawing a line, a boundary. If you cross it, I walk away. Even if it means disappearing all over again. I won't let my son get dragged into a world that doesn't belong to him. Vincent was silent for a few seconds, then set his cup down. I understand, and I accept. Any future meeting with Jack will happen with your permission. I won't push you past limits you're unwilling to cross. I'll keep my word. Just like your father once kept his to me. I nodded, holding his gaze. There's one more thing. I don't belong to your world. I don't wear designer clothes. I don't sip wine at silent auctions or shake hands laced with hidden threats. I'm a single mother who used to scrub restaurant toilets to afford milk. I don't need to be pampered. I need to be respected. A smile tugged at his mouth just barely. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. You're the first person to say that to me in years, and maybe the only one I've been willing to listen to. I didn't smile back. I stood, smoothed the cuff of my shirt, and walked to the door. Before I left, I turned once more. Thank you for playing with Jack yesterday. He talked about you all evening. I expected him to be smug, but he wasn't. Vincent simply nodded, his voice quiet. That boy. He reminds me of someone who was once very brave. And as I stepped out of his office, I realized I had just reclaimed something I thought I'd lost. Control. Not the kind you use to dominate others, but the kind you need to stay whole. To stay standing in a world where every line can be blurred. Today, I had drawn a line, and Vincent Morello hadn't crossed it. At least, not today. That evening, after a long day spent managing quarterly schedules and sorting through reports for 3 of Vincent's subsidiary companies, I returned home exhausted but strangely, not heavy-hearted. Jack was quietly sketching at his desk. Mrs. Ruiz folding laundry in the back room. I moved silently to my bedroom, opened the drawer of my desk, and pulled out the small wooden box I had carried with me from our old apartment. It was the only thing I had left from my father. My mother had given it to me on my 18th birthday, her hands trembling as she said, "Don't open this unless you truly need to." And I hadn't. I had tucked it deep inside a suitcase, hidden it behind winters and last-minute moves, behind years of not wanting to know too much. But now, with the past refusing to stay buried, my father's name spoken by the most powerful man in Chicago, like a sacred debt, I couldn't ignore it any longer. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the lid. Inside were a few old letters, several faded photographs, a rusted wristwatch, and at the very bottom, carefully sealed in a small plastic sleeve, a torn photograph. I pulled it out. In the photo, my father stood, is much younger, beside a man whose face I recognized instantly. Dim lighting, sharp suits, and behind them a large oil painting I had seen before, hanging in Vincent's office. I narrowed my eyes. The man next to my father was Vincent's father. Their expressions were unreadable but intense. Two men who had been through fire together, bonded by something heavier than words. I flipped the photo over. My father's handwriting stared back at me. Asterisk. The last night at the old base. Time to pull out. Thank you, Vince. If trembled. I sat motionless. What old base? Pull out from what? My father never served in the military. He was just a laborer. Wasn't he? I opened the letters and read each one slowly. Most were to my mother affectionate, plain-spoken, steady. But one stood out. No envelope. Just a page. Pencil, written in a rushed, uneven hand. Asterisk. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I tried to keep you and Emily safe, but things are spiraling beyond control. Vincent will keep his word. He's the only one I trust. Please don't let our daughter come back to Chicago unless she has no choice. Asgade. I dropped the letter, not even aware of the tears falling. Every line rewrote everything I'd believed for the past 20 years. My father had not simply been a quiet, hard-working man. He had made a choice, one that cost him everything. And now I had made the very choice he had warned against. I had come back. I was working for the man he trusted with his last breath. I picked up the photo again. This time, my eyes caught something small at the corner, a faint symbol engraved in the frame of the painting behind them. 3 spears pointed inward, forming a triangle. I'd seen that emblem before on a discreet plaque outside the restricted conference room in Vincent's office. It hadn't meant anything at the time. Now, I wasn't so sure. I packed the contents back into the box and slid it into the drawer. Not to forget, but to remember. As a marker. As proof. My father had lived for a truth he never explained. And now, I needed to understand the part he never told. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. Vincent was already in a meeting. I didn't wait. I walked straight in and placed the photograph on the table between us. He looked up, startled but not displeased. I didn't let him speak. "This is from my father," he wrote on the back. "It looks like he and your father were part of something important." Vincent took the photo carefully, held it in silence. When he finally lifted his eyes, there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Pain. Yes, but also reverence, and something like sorrow. "You opened the box." I nodded. "I think I have the right to know." He exhaled slowly, setting the photo down like it carried weight beyond the paper. "Then I think it's time I tell you everything. But you need to understand what your father was part of isn't something easy to accept. It's not clean. It's not simple. And once you know, you won't be able to go back to the version of yourself that didn't know." I clenched my hands. I haven't been that version of myself since the day he died. I'm here now to find out who he really was. And I'm not leaving until I do. Vincent nodded, his eyes no longer guarded. "All right, then let me take you back to a night in October, years ago, to a place where it all began, and where the cost of loyalty was paid in blood. That night, Vincent told me about that October evening with such clarity. It was as if the memories had been carved into him sharp, vivid, untouched by time. A covert weapons deal, a trap laid from within, and a betrayal so deep it nearly brought the Morello family to its knees in a single night. My father, Vincent Carter, was the only one who stepped into the chaos. Unarmed, with nothing but a hand-drawn map, an old radio, and the unwavering belief that the boy standing in the middle of that storm had to survive. I couldn't reconcile that version of him with the quiet man I remembered, a man who rarely spoke, who preferred repairing broken radios to arguing with anyone, had once been the hinge on which a war turned. But there was no room for doubt in Vincent's eyes as he spoke only the haunted reverence of a man who had once owed his life to another, and had never forgotten. By the time he finished, my chest felt heavy with a truth too large to carry. I left the office in silence and hailed a taxi. I needed space, air, solitude. But as we pulled out of the garage, something itched at the back of my mind. A black car followed us. Steady, unremarkable, but too consistent. Every turn we made, it followed. I didn't speak. I told the driver to take a longer route, circling through unfamiliar streets. When the car was still behind us as we turned onto Wabash, I knew it wasn't coincidence. I asked to stop at the next corner, pretending I had a meeting. The car didn't stop, but just before it disappeared, the passenger window rolled down, and I caught a glimpse of the man inside. Daniel's cousin. The same man from the surveillance photo on Vincent's laptop. My pulse roared in my ears. By the time I reached home, my skin was prickling with unease. Mrs. Ruiz met me at the door. Someone came by this morning, she said. A woman. Blonde. Polite. But there was something in her eyes I didn't like. I didn't give her anything, but she left a card. She handed it to me. A cream-colored business card, heavy with elegance, embossed in gold. Madeline Bryant. My hand tightened. Not Daniel. His mother. A woman who had once looked at me as if I were something she needed to have removed an inconvenience. I still remembered her voice, low and cold, when she summoned me to meet her after learning I was pregnant. Asterisk. If you think this baby will tether Daniel to you, you're mistaken. I had never asked for money, never tried to reach them again. I had made my choice to walk away. But now, they had returned. Not with noise. Not with lawsuits or threats yet, but with quiet precision. A silent breach. I sent Vincent a message. Just a few words. Asterisk. They're here. 15 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. Not Vincent. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as legal counsel for the Bryant family. His tone was calm, almost courteous, but everything about him felt false. He handed me a thick envelope. Asterisk. The Bryant family would like to reconnect with Jack. Asterisk, he said. Asterisk. They're requesting a conversation around visitation and financial support. If we don't hear from you within 7 days, legal steps will be taken. I didn't open the envelope. I only asked one question. Asterisk. Does Daniel know he has a son? Asterisk. The lawyer gave a small, practiced smile. Asterisk, Miss Carter. That's no longer the point. This isn't just about Daniel. This is about family. I closed the door with trembling hands, the envelope still clutched in mine. I called Vincent. He arrived in less than 10 minutes. I handed him the card, the envelope, told him everything. The car, the man watching, the woman asking questions. His face darkened. He made a phone call quick. Sharp commands in a tone that brooked no argument. Asterisk. They're testing you. Asterisk, he said when he hung up. If you stay quiet, they'll press harder. If you fight, they'll drag out the legal team. This time he lifted the envelope times as their first move. My voice cracked. Asterisk. I don't want Jack dragged into court. I don't want him forced to choose between two worlds. Vincent stepped forward. His voice was low. Steady. He won't be. I won't let them turn this into a media circus. But you need to stand tall now. Emily, this isn't just about you anymore. They've stepped out of the shadows, and we can't hide forever. I nodded. My hand still shook, but something in me had hardened. This was no longer a quiet threat. The Bryants had declared war. And now, standing between my son and the storm, I had no choice but to fight. No way back. No more pretending this would go away. They had come for him, and I would face them all. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, Vincent was already there, standing in front of a large strategy board in his private meeting room, a space only his closest allies were allowed to enter. He didn't look up when I walked in. Instead, he nodded toward the chair opposite him. Sit. We've got work to do. 10. I sat quietly, my eyes scanning the whiteboard covered with company diagrams. Arrows, red dots, and names I'd heard in passing during major meetings. In the center, 2 names were circled in bold. Asterisk Bryant Holdings times and times. Vincent Morello asterisk. He tapped his pen lightly against the edge of the table, his voice low and steady. The Bryant family is falling apart. They've lost a major partner in Europe. They're under investigation for internal financial fraud. And they almost don't have enough liquidity to keep their operations running for the next 6 months. But they can't let the market know that. So, they need a good story. A face. A family. His eyes met mine briefly. A young hair. Jack? I clenched my hands in my lap. They wanted to use my son as a media tool. Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable. A redemption story. A reunion. Rebuilding public trust. It could save their stock. And if they have Jack, they have their trump card. I frowned. I swallowed hard, my voice tight with emotion. I can't let that happen. Vincent's gaze hardened. And neither will I. So, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll strike back. It's a little the weather. I sat up straight. What do you mean? He flipped the board around, revealing a detailed ownership structure of hidden stakes beneath the names of their subsidiaries. A chain of links that stretched from the Cayman Islands to Delaware, leading to a small investment firm I had never heard of. This is Bryant's back door. The way they launder money for shady projects, he said, tapping the chart. I've been tracking it for 8 months, but couldn't move until I had a legitimate reason. Now, thanks to them involving you and Jack, I have one. Tannic. I looked at him, half in disbelief, half in fear. What are you planning to do? Vincent's smile was cold, calculated. I'm going to buy them out. I'll dismantle the Bryant empire from the inside. Not with guns, but with money. I'll target the secondary shareholders, the ones who are desperate because their assets are frozen. I'll slowly acquire their shares, piece by piece, until the name Bryant is nothing more than a hollow shell. It's a papa. I swallowed. You're sure this will work? We're Ed. Vincent looked at me, his eyes sharp as a blade. I've never started something I didn't finish, but I need your help this time. I furrowed my brow. What can I do? He handed me a thick stack of documents. Inside were internal emails, bank reports, and encrypted statements. You were a financial analyst. I need you to validate the entire cash flow in this file. If you find any inconsistencies we haven't spotted yet, it'll be a game changer. I opened the first page. Instantly, my mind shifted into work mode. Numbers, charts, hidden accounts. Cross-transfers began to unfold like a familiar maze. This felt like the old days in Boston, sitting in the conference room with auditors, unraveling the financial camouflage of a company hiding bad debt. But this time, it wasn't for a contract. It was for my son. I looked up. How long? Vincent answered without hesitation. 7 days. I'll leak news that we're considering investing in a struggling company. The market will guess it's Bryant. Their stock will fluctuate. The weaker shareholders will panic. And when they start selling, we'll swoop in. I was readed. Already knows. I nodded, closing the file. In my head, dozens of data points awaited analysis. But what really pushed me to act was not what was written on those pages. It was the look in Vincent's eyes. In those eyes, I saw more than just the coldness of a businessman or a kingpin. I saw protection, not through promises, but through action. A retaliatory move, a calculated strike. On the way home, I sat in the back seat, wind rushing through the car window. No longer gripped by the same fear I'd felt before. If the Bryant family thought they could use power and money to take my son, they had chosen the wrong person to threaten. This time, we wouldn't retreat. This time, we would be the ones in control. And I, Emily Carter, would not let anyone place their dirty hands on Jack's future. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. I worked alongside Vincent nearly 16 hours a day, handling hundreds of pages of financial data, dissecting every transfer, uncovering the hidden money trails Bryant Corporation had buried through its Caribbean subsidiaries. The deeper I dug, the more overwhelmed I became. The numbers not only revealed fraud, but they also pointed to links with political interest groups, slush funds, and names that had surfaced in major financial scandals. Vincent never once showed any sign of hesitation. He made decisions swiftly, acted with precision, and always kept things under control. From the outside, everything was progressing according to plan. But from the inside, I started to feel that something wasn't right. Every time I left the office, someone was waiting in the lobby to escort me. Not a regular driver, but a bodyguard. When I went to pick up Jack from his new preschool, someone followed me from the corner of the street. They didn't speak, just nodded in greeting, then followed a few steps behind. When I went into a store to buy milk, they waited outside. At first, I reassured myself that this was just security, but by the 5th day, when I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, I knew this protection had turned into a cage. I walked down to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there, frozen in the cold, sterile light of the bulb. The silence was suffocating. I no longer knew if I was being protected or controlled. I recalled Vincent's words. Asterisk, I won't let anyone touch you or your son. Asterisk. At the time, it had felt like a promise of salvation. Now, it echoed like a declaration of power. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking out at the city asleep beneath the dull yellow streetlights. The night wind tousled my hair, and my heart ached in my chest. I had lived so many years in fear, struggling to control everything. Now, with someone else controlling my life, I felt lost. Was this the instinct of a single mother, used to holding everything together? Or was it the sense that this safety wasn't truly unconditional? The next day, when I entered the office, Vincent was standing by the window, his back to the door. Unlike usual, he wasn't holding his phone, giving orders, or typing on his laptop. He was simply standing there, silent. I knocked lightly on the doorframe. He turned around. Did you sleep well? I didn't answer right away. I walked over, placing a new stack of documents on the table. I need to ask you something. I expected. He nodded. I asked directly. Jack and I are being protected, but if I decide to leave all of this and take him out of Chicago, would you let me go? Vincent studied me for a long moment, then walked over, pulling out the chair across from me. His voice was deep but not cold. Emily, you know I don't keep people with promises. I keep them with loyalty. I've never forced you to stay. But if you leave now, everything your father worked for will be meaningless. You can walk away from me, but you can't walk away from the legacy he left. Endcrest. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't respond, only stared into his eyes. And what unsettled me most wasn't the threat. It was the feeling that he was telling the truth. No threats. No coercion. Just the truth. The truth that once I entered this world, I was no longer a part of the world I had left behind. I turned away, trying to regain my composure. Then, if I stay, I said, I need one more condition. I need to choose Jack's caregiver. No one of yours will be near my son without my permission. Texas, eh? Vincent nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Ara says. And I need my own space. I added, I can't live with someone always watching my every move. I don't want cameras in the bedroom. I need to feel like I'm still human, not just a pawn in your game. As one a day. Vincent looked at me for a long time. Then he stood up and walked toward the window. You're not a pawn. You're the only person I've ever trusted not to betray me. But I understand. I'll make the adjustments. Izakara did. When I left the room, I didn't feel any lighter, but at least I knew I still had a voice. I hadn't completely lost myself yet, and that was all I could hold on to at this moment. In the fragile boundary between safety and control, I was still trying to hold on to some freedom, even if it was small. It was the only thing that kept me moving forward. We left Chicago on a misty Sunday morning. Vincent didn't say much. He handed me a sealed envelope and told me someone would be waiting at our destination. Jack. Still drowsy. leaned his head against my shoulder in the car while I sat in silence, watching the city fade behind us through the window, its final flickers of night blurring into the soft November drizzle. The house by the lake was tucked away in the quiet outskirts, nearly a 3-hour drive from the city. It wasn't a grand estate, not the kind of place I imagined someone like Vincent would keep hidden. Instead, it was disarmingly simple. Red-brown roof tiles soft with moss, dark wooden walls weathered by time, and the faint scent of wind. A forest, and a life untouched by the world's noise. A silver-haired man greeted us at the door. Mason. He introduced himself. He had once been the personal driver for Vincent's father. He handed me a set of keys without questions or expectations. When the door closed behind us, I felt a strange stillness settle over everything. For the first time in months, there were no bodyguards, or no ringing phones, no watchful eyes. Just me, Jack, and a silence so deep I could hear the leaves falling outside the porch. Jack dashed through the house like a squirrel loosed into the woods, his small voice echoing with wonder at the old fireplace, at the wooden boat propped against the wall, at a drawer stuffed with children's books. I stood and watched, a quiet warmth blooming in my chest. In that moment, I wished time would stop, but it didn't. When Jack fell asleep for his afternoon nap, I sat alone on the porch, the pale sunlight filtering through the tall trees, the still surface of the lake reflecting the shape of the house behind me. And then Vincent arrived. He appeared without sound, only the crunch of footsteps on gravel alerting me. I turned. He wore a long coat, a paper bag in one hand. "Coffee and pastries," he said, from the town nearby. I didn't refuse. We sat together, sipping coffee, saying nothing, like two strangers on a night bus, carrying stories neither of us knew how to share. Then, finally, Vincent spoke, voice low. "Your father brought me here when I was 14. He said there are fears you can't overcome with money or guns. You have to sit with them, look them in the eye." I turned to look at him. This was the first time I saw Vincent stripped of the layers, the strategist, the kingmaker, the man always in control. What sat beside me now was simply a man carrying a memory. I asked quietly, "And you? Do you have fears you haven't overcome?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Yes, losing someone I once believed would never leave me, the way you thought of your father." Ascarate-minded. I turned away. I didn't trust myself to look into his eyes just then, because if I did, I'd see things I wasn't ready to name. We didn't speak again until evening. When Jack woke, Vincent helped me prepare dinner. He grilled fish outside while I boiled potatoes and chopped salad. The kitchen filled with warmth and the sound of Jack laughing when Vincent spilled the salt. And in that soft golden light, everything felt too peaceful. The kind of peace that's dangerous, because it makes you dream. Dream of a life with no threats, no lawyers, no secrets. Dream of a man you could trust to help raise your child. Not because he owed you, but because he wanted to. After Jack fell asleep again, Vincent and I sat by the fireplace. The flames danced across his face, softening the sharp lines that had once intimidated me. I asked him, "If one day all this ends, if I choose to leave and live a quiet life, what would you do?" He answered slowly, "I wouldn't stop you, but I would remember, and I would still protect you, wherever you are." Expirated. I turned to him, not looking away this time, and in his eyes, I saw it clearly, not the power broker, not the man who commanded loyalty with silence, but the man who once owed his life to my father, who now cared deeply for my son, and who bit by bit was letting me into the most unguarded corners of his soul. And in that moment, I knew I had changed. I was no longer the woman who stumbled into his office desperate and afraid. I was the Emily of now, the woman who had survived heartbreak, betrayal, and sacrifice, who knew how to get back up, whose heart, though scarred, had begun to open again. And this place, the quiet house by the lake, had become the first space where I could admit it. I wasn't just running anymore. I was finding my way back to myself. We returned to Chicago on a winter afternoon. when the last rays of the day stretched long across the wet pavement, casting golden streaks over the city's familiar skyline. The city hadn't changed, still loud, still bustling, but I was no longer the woman who had left this place in fear and doubt. Jack sat in the back seat, nibbling on a pastry and singing to himself, while Vincent, for the first time not in his private car, sat beside me in a simple SUV, his hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes quietly observing the flow of pedestrians outside. There were no words between us during the drive back to the Morello Group headquarters, but the silence wasn't cold anymore. It felt like an unspoken agreement that from this moment on, everything would be lived in truth. Vincent pulled the car to a stop in front of the main entrance, where reporters had already gathered. I knew it was coming. The financial counterattack against the Bryant family couldn't stay silent forever. The rumors had already leaked whispers of the Morello Group preparing to take control of Bryant Holdings. Some claimed Vincent was using personal ties to exert pressure on the once glamorous media family. But they were still just rumors. Today, we were going to turn it into a reality. Vincent stepped out of the car first, walking with his usual calm, unbothered posture. I followed beside him, holding Jack's hand. As we passed through the row of cameras, I could hear their voices calling Vincent's name, asking about merger strategies, investments. But their tone changed the moment they saw me. "Is that Emily Carter? She used to work for Bryant, didn't she? And this is her son. Is this related to the recent dispute?" Vincent didn't stop. He walked straight into the grand lobby, and I followed without looking back. But just before the glass doors closed, I glanced over my shoulder. The flashes of the cameras lit up the space, and in that moment, I knew I had officially stepped into the light. Inside, Vincent turned to look at me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, my heartbeat still trying to catch up, but I knew, in that instant, I had done the right thing. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't afraid of being seen. I wasn't hiding Jack as if he were some shameful secret. On the top floor, Vincent held a small press conference with key stakeholders. I didn't attend. I stayed in his private office, listening to his voice through the TV speakers in the media room. Vincent spoke without hesitation. He openly acknowledged that he was in the process of acquiring shares from Bryant Holdings. He made it clear that this was not just a business strategy but a matter of personal honor. And then he spoke about me. "Emily Carter is part of the new financial leadership team, and she is the person I trust the most in this entire operation." End quote. Seconds later, my name appeared on social media, in news bulletins, and headlines not as a former employee of Bryant but as a partner of Vincent Morello, and more importantly, as the woman he was publicly standing beside. That evening, when I took Jack to the new apartment arranged for us in the Morello Tower, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mom, I saw you on TV today. I saw you standing next to Uncle Vincent. You looked so pretty." In fact, I held him close, my lips trembling. I may not have been ready for all the consequences of this decision. I may still have fear in my heart, but at least, in that moment, I knew I was no longer alone, and I was no longer hiding. I had stepped into the world my father once risked everything to protect, and I had chosen to move forward, not for fame or fortune, but for myself, for Jack, and perhaps for the growing feelings in my heart, feelings I had once refused to acknowledge, but now couldn't ignore. That winter passed slowly, not with storms or midnight phone calls or doors slamming shut with the weight of secrets, but with a quiet stillness. As if the world had finally taken a breath after the storm, life began to settle, like a painting that had once been torn apart now slowly being pieced back together. I continued to work alongside Vincent, no longer as a woman carrying the burden of a debt or being sheltered more than necessary, but as Emily Carter, a capable woman in her own right, a respected financial strategist, and above all, a mother to Jack, the child I once feared would grow up in the emptiness of an unfinished family. Jack remained the same bright soul, full of questions about trucks and dinosaurs. His smile a daily reminder that every sacrifice had been worth it. But now, he had someone else, someone who once seemed too armored to let anyone in, learning how to listen, how to be patient, and how to be gentle in ways that even surprised him. Vincent never told me he loved me, but I saw it. In how he took Jack to school on mornings when I was caught in early meetings. In how he tried to cook dinner even though he clearly didn't know his way around a kitchen. In the way his eyes followed me across a crowded room. Like I was the only anchor he trusted. We never made declarations. There were no vows. No formal beginnings. Family didn't have to start with a ceremony. Sometimes, it begins with a quiet hug after a long day. A shared meal. A glance that says, "I see you, and I choose to stay." I once believed I would forever live in the shadow of the past, dragging my child behind me like a weight through a world too quick to judge. But it was Jack who pulled me out of that silence. It was the memory of my father that reminded me his sacrifice wasn't meant for me to keep running. And it was Vincent, this man I had once thought belonged to the other side of the light, who stood by me when the road was at its most uncertain. Looking back now, I realize life doesn't always hand you an easy path, but it leaves signs. Small ones. So you'll know you're not alone. Family isn't where we begin. It's what we choose. Where we decide to end the hurt. And where we open the door to something new. If you're a single mom, or someone who once believed there wouldn't be a second chance, please know this: new beginnings are still out there, waiting in places you may never have thought to look. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If you felt a connection, if some part of Emily's journey reminded you of your own or of someone you've known, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel times Dear Single Mom *, so you won't miss any of the stories that touch the heart each day. What did today's story stir in you? Did it bring to mind something real? Something you've lived or are living through? I'd truly love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. Your words are a bridge. A thread that weaves together the hearts of those who've been wounded and are finding their way back to wholeness. Until next time, thank you. May you have strength, joy in your days, and peace in your heart. Goodbye for now. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video with more stories of courage, tenderness, and the quiet power of starting again.